So welcome to another episode of Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero, where we live the life and the lifestyle of Ayn Rand's characters, to live a life that we can't wait to wake up to, a heroic life that inspires us. I'm today with Will Thomas. What is your title at Atlas Society?
I'm the Director of Programs and the Chief Financial Officer, which means that I organize our summer conference, the Atlas Summit, from soup to nuts. I currently handle all our business affairs, and I'm a writer, teacher, educator, and commentator about objectivism.
Yes. Author of best-selling books, Radical For Capitalism,
right?
About Ayn Rand. And
yes, Radical For Capitalism is an introduction to Ayn Rand's political thought. Mm-hmm. And it's available also on audible.com, so check it out.
Fantastic.
And I'm the primary contributor to a little book called The Myths About Ayn Rand, where we wrestle with some of the common false ideas people have about Rand, like that Rand was an elitist, or in that same vein that Rand thought the wealthy were all good and the poor were all bad, or that Rand was for dog-eat-dog selfishness. These things.
The caricatures that her detractors try to oversimplify her into a straw man.
Right.
And clearing those up, kind of one at a time, taking each one for its own merit, examining the evidence, and coming up with a conclusion.
That's right. So check it out, Myths About Ayn Rand, on Amazon.
Yes.
And I've also worked on a big sort of survey of the whole objectivist philosophy called the Logical Structure of Objectivism.
Which... one of the things I want to talk to you, we've actually had a conversation about this to a degree. There's a map where they have essentially mind mapped out and shown the logical relationships between all of the major ideas in objectivism. And it is, for serious objectivists, it's something to behold. It's something to spend hours with as you just notice the connections between ideas. Oh, yes, I can see why they put this here and why this is there. And, ooh, I like this. And, ooh, okay, so that connects. And it's fantastic for really integrating your knowledge. And since integrating is really what Ayn Rand is all about, it's an enormous contribution.
Yeah, I actually made the big diagram itself. Mm-hmm. I made it. But a lot of the work, most of the work, I suppose, that's in it is David Kelly's from an original diagramming that he did. And I worked with him on connecting the dots, adding some things, changing some things, and we co-wrote a book that explains why that diagram looks the way it does. That's the Logical Structure of Objectivism, which is available on our website, the atlassociety.org.
Yes. And Atlas Society, you've worked with them for 18, 20 years? Somewhere in there?
18 years.
18 years. Yee-haw. Thank you for your work as an admirer of Ayn Rand, who, like most people, we read her books, we get interested in it, we delve in, and we read, we write, we have conversations online. Atlas Society is just an enormous resource.
Thanks very much.
Right, and also Will has a number of talks that he's given on various aspects of objectivism that you can get on YouTube or at the Atlas Society. You're a lecturer in economics. You've worked at several universities.
That's right. I have a master's in economics from the University of Michigan originally, though I didn't end up doing that kind of work. But lately I've been working as a visiting lecturer at the University at Albany. I live in Albany, New York, and I teach there. In fact, this semester I'm teaching basic microeconomics there.
Okay, so that's kind of where you are now, what you've accomplished, and what you're up to, right? How did you get here? How did you get turned on to Ayn Rand? What is your story?
Oh, well, it's interesting. I was brought up in a sort of standard liberal household where the Democratic Party was the religion of the household. That is, when my sister got married to her current husband, she said, "I can't believe I'm marrying a Republican." As if that would be the worst thing you could be. But in any case, so that was my background. I had grown up spending a fair bit of my childhood in the third world. So I had a complex relationship with America, both idealizing it and loving its wonders and wealth, something that most Americans don't appreciate. But I'll tell you, growing up in the real poor third world in places like Pakistan and Thailand, you could just, coming back to America was like stepping into Wonderland. And I've always carried that sense with me ever since. This is a big backstory, but the point is just that this was my background, a sort of problematized liberalism. And as part of my interest in life abroad, I was living in Indonesia after college, and I wanted to take a vacation to escape from the heat and go up onto the slopes of the volcano, Mount Merapi, that overlooks the city of Yogyakarta, where I was living. Because if you go up the slopes, you can get up to springtime if you get high enough.
That's funny.
And there's a resort up there, well, not fancy, but a place you can hang out. And I needed a thick book. And I went into the American Studies library, and there was Atlas Shrugged, and I remembered these things about it. It was a conservative novel. I wasn't a conservative. I had a friend from high school who had put herself through private high school, working 20 hours a week, who I'd admired immensely for that. And she had liked Ayn Rand, which I hadn't been able to understand. But I didn't know anything else really about Ayn Rand. But I thought, what the heck? I'll give it a little read. I read the first page. It didn't really grab me, but my friend had liked it, so I took it with me up onto the volcano. And as I say to people now, read the first 10 pages. And if you can stop reading Atlas Shrugged after reading the first 10 pages, you're stronger than I am. I read it over this course of several days. I was trained in economics, so it's kind of funny. When I came down from the mountain, I was not convinced about a philosophy. I would never have been convinced about a philosophy from a novel, because who in the heck would get a serious philosophy from a novel? That's crazy. But I was struck by Rand's critique of Marx's labor theory of value. I can get into what that critique is later, but I was struck by that. And I came down and I met with my friend and I said, I think maybe capitalism isn't evil. But, the thing about Rand was, and later my girlfriend gave me the Fountainhead to read, within about 9 months. She'd known I'd liked Atlas, and she'd read the Fountainhead, so she gave me that to read. And I read both those books. I thought Ayn Rand had the queerest way of looking at the world. She would have people say things like, you ought to always serve others and never try to live and be happy, or people embrace unreason and all these other things, and that just sounded crazy to me. And then over the next couple years, I kept hearing people say them. I went to work in an office the next year when I was back in the States, and people kept saying these things. And I went on to graduate school in economics at the University of Michigan, and my professors said some of these things. And then there was a Ayn Rand Objectivist Club at the University of Michigan, and they brought speakers. I think the first one I saw was Harry Binswanger from the Ayn Rand Institute, and he spoke on power coming from the barrel of a gun, which I thought was interesting because Mao had that dictum too. Mao Zedong did in China. But that got me interested in reading Rand's nonfiction. And again, I would have never read the nonfiction of a fiction writer, because if you've ever done that, for most novelists, it's really not a pleasant experience, especially the ones that think they are philosophical, because they're often just silly. But Ayn Rand made a ton of sense, and the more I thought about it, the more the more it made sense to me. And so about the time I was about a year, 2 years into my graduate work at the University of Michigan, and this is now about 3 years after I read Atlas Shrugged, I was starting to take objectivism very seriously. So that's about how I got interested in it.
So out of curiosity, so you could say I had an advantage over you in that sense, in that I was a postmodernist. I was a hardcore postmodernist before I encountered Ayn Rand. And so I was quite familiar with what the characters were saying, and it was extraordinarily painful to to have those characters be the ones saying that, right? But in the process of moving from I am not a conservatism and republicanism, I mean, this is just bad,
Right.
right? Which you could say I was a little bit stronger than that, but what was it like for you to question those beliefs, to begin to ask the questions that you perhaps hadn't asked before and confront issues that you hadn't confronted? What was that like for you?
Well, for me, objectivism put a bunch of things together for me and called me to some deep values. So this is sort of a different experience from some people. You see, one thing is being brought up in this kind of liberal tradition, the people in my family and the people we tended to admire were people who were self-starters. They acted on reason in practical matters. They were responsible people, productive. They just ought to pay a ton of taxes and capitalism was evil. But that's all superstructure. That's not the way you live. So one of the things that was really attractive about objectivism, once I understood it, was it said, no, really live that way. Take it seriously. Think about its principles. And the other thing about Rand being a conservative is when I started reading Atlas, the story was gripping and exciting, but by the time I got to the sex, I knew I wasn't reading a conservative novel. Whatever it was.
This is true. This is not conservatism as I've been, no. Yes.
Right? Where it's, when Dagny Taggart says, I am an animal, right? And I want you with all the passion of an animal, right? That is, William Buckley would never be down for that.
Yes, exactly. And I want you in this way, and I don't need any of the trappings. And yes, you have your wife, and I have nothing to do with that.
Right, exactly. The whole problematization of marriage in there, where the whole point is that marriage, fine or not, as a cultural ceremony, but not the important thing, not the fundamental thing. Which, by the way, is one way you've asked sort of about how objectivism informs your life, and that's one way it's informed my life, because I live the life of a married man. I am in a committed long-term partnership, but we do it as individualists. We're not making promises about a future that we can't really keep. We're not trapped in a legal framework that we didn't choose. So we live unmarried in that legal sense. We have a family, shared house, shared cars, shared finances in some respects. But we do it on every day I know I chose to be here. Every day I'm saying I love you, And I'm not criticizing people who get married. I know what it means to them. I know how important it is. But I'm just saying that's one aspect in which the values of objectivism sort of have mattered. That is, not to not get married, to not be serious, not to not be committed, not to not try and have the values that you can have from that, but to not get caught up in what society expects of you. Do it for yourself. Do it for what you're committed to, and do it in terms of virtue, your commitment to long-term principles. That's an aspect of my life.
Yeah, it brings up one of my favorite distinctions, which is between the letter and the spirit of the law.
Exactly.
Right, and as you're saying this, one of the reasons that's so important to me is that the spirit is where the life is. Language, it's always an attempt to capture an insight, and it forms the insight. The way you use language helps you clarify what the insight is, but it's the insight that matters, not the language, not the trappings, not the form that it's in. It's the values that matter, not the goals that you understand. That would be an instantiation of that value, therefore I will seek that goal, right? But it's the key to objectivism, from my perspective, is always focusing on the reality that's underneath the reason. That reason is a way of understanding and working with reality, of integrating the facts of reality, including the facts of your own values and how you work with others and what's possible, the creation of this. Right? And as you speak about that, you're saying, okay, so what is the spirit of the relationship that we want? Right? Let's be clear about that, and let's have that be the life, not the form. Let's not get caught up in the form. And it's one of the great ironies of Ayn Rand, or how she's perceived in the world, which is just, I'm sure you have similar frustrations I do. You wrote the book or worked on the book Myths of Ayn Rand, right? About how people systematically misunderstand her philosophy, right? And you, in many cases intentionally, these are people who have not read her, who are just looking to create some kind of story that will delegitimize her. But the focus on reason is not just logic. It's an entire philosophy of looking what's real, what's truly important. Where is the essence of the issues involved, and how can I work towards that essence? Not how do I create a formal system and then become dogmatic about that system.
Right. It's all about you're a living being, you're a living individual living in reality. And the reason aspect is deal with reality. Be in reality. Find everything wonderful that's there in reality. Mm-hmm. That's what that means.
Yeah. Again, one more step down that road. Knowledge is contextual. Ayn Rand, this is a central thesis of her epistemology. Knowledge is contextual.
Right. Which means that it's based in a certain amount of facts that you know. It isn't omniscient. It's always in some context of information that you have. It's always based on that. But the context is reality. So that's why our knowledge isn't wide crazily disparate.
Yes. And Ayn Rand's central thesis, it's objectivism, which is built on the idea that existence exists, reality has a nature, and reason is the process of identifying that reality in increasing levels of sophistication and increasing levels of depth. Right. And the current formulation you have is always inadequate to the truth of reality. In this sense, there's an idea in postmodernism which says that we can never truly know reality. And from my understanding, objectivism acknowledges the fact that you can get more complete understandings of reality. But that doesn't nullify your previous conclusions. The more you learn about something, the more distinctions you make and the more refined it gets. But the fundamental idea that reality has a nature, that it is knowable, and that we use reason to refine that capacity, right? That understanding, again, this is how I understand letter and spirit. Reality does have a nature, and we're constantly improving our capacity to name it so that we can work with it in order to achieve our values with others.
Right. You mentioned the postmodernists, and one of the things about the postmodernists, and a lot of philosophy generally, is the postmodernists say knowledge would be being instantly and effortlessly, perfectly and completely aware of everything with no chance of error ever happening. That would be knowledge. We don't have any knowledge. Well, one of the things I think is really intellectually exciting about objectivism is, and I've got some lectures online where I talk about this, but I'll try and say it briefly here, that objectivism takes the idea that the traditional realists had, that there's a reality, our words, our concepts mean something, there is truth and you can know it, and then agrees with everything the subjectivists and postmodernists said. They said we don't have instant, diaphanous, mirror-like apprehension of all the facts of reality with no effort. You're right, we don't. We don't. And in fact, no one has ever had anything like that. And to say that would be knowledge is just to ignore what knowledge actually is. And so then objectivism comes back and say, well, what is knowledge? Well, if we can build an airplane that can fly around the world, we know something. If we can invent amazing medicines that cure people from diseases that you can't even see with the naked eye, we know something. We know things. And this is just beginning. I'm an economics professor. And one of the things that I really enjoy about teaching basic economics is how much I can teach my students things that we know, things that are true.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So getting into it, we've got reality, metaphysics, what is. We've got reason, how do we know it? Right? How do we use that knowledge? And then there's knowledge about ourself. Right? What is the nature of human being? What is good for human being, and therefore what is values, ethics, morality, or what I call that level responsibility. Right. Because the reality is, and our job is to know it, and we're the only ones who can know it. We have to learn it. Knowledge cannot be given. It must be understood. It must be taken in that sense. It must be generated. Even if someone gives you an idea, you have to understand it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and one that I talk about whenever I'm talking about the virtue of independence and objectivism, which is about thinking for yourself. And the point there is one you were just making, that the knowledge that we have is knowledge because it's ours. It's because it's our apprehension of reality. It's our understanding of the facts. And so another person can never give you knowledge, because if they tell you something, what they haven't done is caused your understanding of the facts. They can tell you something, you can understand it, you can cause your understanding of the facts using it. Certainly in many, many fields, we stand on the shoulders of giants who've helped us see things we wouldn't have easily seen ourselves. But in each of those cases, you don't actually know the material. You don't know the fact until you've processed it yourself. You've understood what the facts of the matter actually are in those cases. And it's just like if you hear a rumor from someone, you don't know that it's true until you've found out what the truth of the matter is. And in a way, all the information other people give us is rumor in that sense, until we do the effort to figure out what facts are at stake and figure out what would make those statements true or false.
Yes. And that is our primary fundamental responsibility in life, both in terms of the sense that it's our responsibility, right? And that is what gives us our ability to respond. Right? We're the ones who must figure out reality so that we can achieve our values. And we have to find out what our values are. We have to discover them, to articulate them,
right,
so that we can make them ours, so that we can act on them. Right? How has that particular kind of responsibility guided your life, or in terms of the novels, the characters? Are there particular moments or scenes or characters that have given you that sense of, this is my life to create. It's my life to understand and make happen?
Well, that's an attitude that runs through basically all of Rand's heroes. Basically anyone that she views sympathetically. Let's take Gail Wynand, for instance, in The Fountainhead, is someone who she views sympathetically in the novel, although he's a flawed character and in a way is a bit of a villain in the story. Certainly a flawed man who's gone down the wrong path and really can't be redeemed, is one of the messages of the novel, where he went after power. He based on the approval of the population as a newspaper magnate, and then when he tried to use that power for good, he couldn't, and realized he'd used all his productive power to create an illusion. And Rand gives the implication that he commits suicide in The Fountainhead when he realizes this fact. which is a very sad thing. But the point about that is, why is Winand admirable to Rand? Because Winand was a self-starter who fought his way up from Hell's Kitchen, who built a newspaper empire. So his encounter with the world was, firsthand about taking responsibility for his own life. Now, he ended up believing that he was at war with everyone and that he needed to exploit the weaknesses of everyone in order to have power over them. But that's a common mistake that people make. And still, he came at that from the right attitude. So there's these moments in the Fountainhead when the hero, Howard Rourke, who's exceptionally consistent as an independent, responsible, individually thinking person, meets Winand, and Winand wants to corrupt Rourke, as he's corrupted many other artists, finds Rourke is uncorruptible, and Rourke is kind of surprised because he doesn't have many friends, because he doesn't have many people he can connect with on this fundamental level, and he realized Winand is one of these people who he can really respect on a fundamental level. He's made errors, but his attitude towards life is correct. And so that's an example of that in the fiction.
Yeah.
I would say that for myself, the implication was of that principle was really just validation for a desire I probably would have had anyway to try and live as an independent person. My family background was kind of, I suppose, upper middle class. There were some resources at various times. If you wanted in that family to mooch, you could mooch a lot. And there are some members of my family who have kind of mooched through their lives, have been really impacted by that. So a really important part of developing as an individual myself would be to just to stand on my own 2 feet, be my own person, own my own choices, feel like I can understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
Yeah, this idea of a self-made person, self-made man. There's something about the choice to take responsibility, which gives you a sense of self that allows you to occupy the space that you're in. You've earned it. That's probably my favorite line in all of Atlas Shrugged is when Dagny says, "Yes, I've earned
it." Right. I'm going to make a pile of money, and I earned it.
Yeah. Yes. And because it's that the more you own yourself, the more you take responsibility, the more the things that you create are yours. And then you can own them. And the more you create, you could say the larger yourself becomes. And that's certainly not just finances or just work. It's your character, it's your relationships, it's the quality and the depth of the projects that you engage in. It's the meaning that you're creating through what you're doing. And that fundamental choice of responsibility is it's how human beings become human. How they rise above the animal is that they take responsibility and use reason to work with reality.
Yeah, I think when I think about living an objectivist life and putting objectivist principles to work in my life, that's a principle that's very important, which is to always think that however I am and I do things, other people aren't to blame for that. It's down to me if I want to be. It's down to me to be the kind of person I want to be. And that doesn't mean it's always easy to be everything one wants to be. It doesn't mean one never has any flaws, but it does mean that one doesn't feel like one can just fob off one's problems and difficulties on other people, and instead one has to take ownership of oneself, and I think of myself as taking ownership of my own life, and in that sense choosing to be the person I am and making choices about what am I doing. And so that also implies checking in occasionally, not every day, but regularly, a few times a year at least, to reflect on where am I and how am I being and how can I be better, how can I improve my life, what are things that are working and what aren't, and then it's up to you as an individual to take responsibility for doing those things. And that idea isn't alien in American culture. It's a very common idea, but objectivism just takes that idea very seriously and says, that's very important and a fundamental principle that should have implications for our own lives and for social organization.
Yes. So one of my mentors is a gentleman named Jason Alexander. I don't know if you've ever encountered his work, but when he talks about ethics, responsibility, his summary of that is that man lives consistent. Right? Is that there is a nature that we have, and the more we live consistent with our nature, the more we own our independence, right? The more we can own our lives, and the more we flourish, right? And in terms of independence, as we move from responsibility, we're kind of going up the hierarchy, the holarchy, right? As we move from responsibility to the realm of interpersonal, which I call respect, or might be called interdependence, and in social terms is called politics, right? Or this is how I'll suggest it is that politics is about the polis. It's about the interpersonal realm, which is, if ethics is about how do you live, politics is about how do you work with other people. And so I use all of Ayn Rand's political thinking in terms of intimate relationships. And this gets back to what you were saying about your partnership. I say that independence makes true interdependence possible. Right? That in fact, the more independent you are, the more you can truly partner with another. Because you take care of your stuff, you handle your stuff, and you can bring something to the partnership that is independent. And then the other person brings their values to the partnership, and together you can create something which is not, it's not other than what you're each bringing, but it's the combination and the integration. Just as we integrate our thinking, we can integrate our actions towards common purposes with others. And this independence, the more independent you are, actually the more interdependent you can become. The more you own yourself, the more you take responsibility for yourself, the easier it is to demonstrate respect for others. I'm curious what you think of that formulation. How does that fit for you?
Well, you said a bunch of different things, so I'll just comment. The issue of what goes into what I would call ethics and what goes into politics is an issue of taxonomy, and that's about how you order your ducks. It's not about what the ducks are, and we should be talking about what the ducks are, not what order that they're in.
I'm good with that.
Yeah. So, and I would just say that when I think about principles of like independence, how should you deal with justice, aspects of honesty, there are a variety of different ethical principles that have to do with other people and are only really relevant in society. Courtesy, civility towards other people, sensitivity towards other people. These are some other principles.
Yeah.
Also,
those ethical principles are contextual. They make sense in that context.
Right. Right. You're courteous towards other people, primarily. Those are all, I would say, social ethics, but I wouldn't call it politics just because I say politics is about organizing society. Mm-hmm. But that said, we were talking just now. Oh dear! Now I've gone off on this thread and I've lost our thread of conversation. And I've went on to say I didn't want to talk about the taxonomy, and I did. And now I've been ordering my ducks too much and lost sight of the ducks. We were talking about you were talking about the principles of independence in personal relationships. So, yes, I think in terms of close relationships with other people, the fact that each person can stand on their own 2 feet is very important. work because then no one is hanging on the other. So that when you come together, you're coming together because you want to be there and you appreciate each other. And you realize that together you're more than you are alone. That you get more, you enjoy more, you do more, you know more, all these things. And I think that's very important. And I think having that attitude towards my relationship has been very important because, I don't know, when I read in the newspapers the kind of comments people write in about advice about how to deal with their marriage partner or whatever, or these endless articles about how, like, you ought to have a discussion about the family financial plan with each other. Whereas it's inconceivable to me to imagine that we wouldn't have that, right? Because for us, coming together is partly an agreement about how are we going to come together financially. There's not just this assumption that one of us will just forget about finances completely and the other will take care of it. Now, I'm not prejudicing how people, work out their relationships. I'm just saying that that's one aspect. And in many others, from our belief system to the aesthetic values we have, there are things where we're together and have agreed on a common ground of things. And we try, it's not like we agree on everything or we're the similar people in a variety of different respects, but we work out which are the things that we're sharing, where is an area where there's cooperation, and then there's deep, strong, total, committed cooperation, sharing, sympathy, all those things. And then we don't get messed up with the stuff that's independent.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the more I like to say that the more you bring to the partnership, right, and the more your partner brings, the more you respect them, the greater the us can be.
Right.
Yeah. The more we. That in fact, I like to say that the us integrity, right? If you take the integrity of the relationship, it is a multiple of the I and the you integrity.
Yeah.
Right. And
right.
And the more that you get clear about who you are, how you're going to live your life, what you care about, the more you can then choose to partner.
That's right.
Right. And right. Like you said, you can differentiate. I often think in terms of Venn diagrams. Right. There are things that I care about that my partner cares about. There are things that I care about that my partner does not care about. And likewise, things that they care about that I don't care about. Right. The more we can get clear that I'm me, she's her. She and I are different.
Right.
It's not a problem that there are things that we care about differently or that we don't care about. That's not a problem. We recognize that. We let one another do that. But then where we come together, we can truly come together because we're not expecting that we're going to come together on everything else. We don't have the letter of this is how relationship is supposed to be, the one right way to relate. Right. And our job is to fit into that idea. No, I have what I want. She has what she wants. We come together. And the skill of relationship is how do you build those partnerships? How do you state what it is that you want and discover what your partner wants so that you can really create something powerful?
Right. That's the basic principle, and that's how it cashes out.
Yeah. I'm curious. It's we've been talking in the context of intimate partnerships or life partnerships. You're raising your child together, living together, right?
Yeah, we have a couple children, but one's off at college.
Okay, but there's also, how does that apply in business? Again, not the political how do we organize society thing, but how do you interact with people? How has that principle impacted how you do business, how you engage in projects with people?
Well, I think it's got a huge implication, actually, for doing business. Because instead of thinking of the work that one does as just a way to get money in order to do everything else that's valuable in life, which is in leisure and not to do with work, Objectivism points out a couple things. That work is the primary way we sustain our lives. And it brings this attitude of self-ownership and self-creation to all one's activities, and that includes work. And so it means that it's got an implication for entrepreneurs that want to run businesses to say, you have to know why you want to be doing that. It's got to have meaning in your life. If your answer is just, I want to make a lot more money, that's not the right answer. You know, the answer could be, I want to make a lot more money because of what that will do for me, because of the wonderful things it will let me do. That's super. But again, it can't be just, I want more toys than the other person. And it has an implication for workers, because in a way, it means your job is a little bit like a marriage. Your job, the place where you go to work for any long length of time, is going to involve a lot of close relationships with people, a lot of close cooperation with people. And if you can't reach some agreement there with them about how things are going to work, what are you responsible for and what you're not, and feel like you're coming in as a kind of partner in the work. And that doesn't matter if you're, an hourly worker, salaried worker, owner, or, all these different things. You have to have that attitude toward the work. Now, there's work you find more intrinsically interesting or less intrinsically interesting, just for what it is. But in all those cases, you have to think about going to work somewhere as a question profoundly of values, of what values will I find in that place, and how will I connect with and cooperate with the people there. And because if you can find a place to work where you feel like you're doing something positive, and this doesn't have to be, inventing the most wonderful medicines in the world or something like this. It can be delivering pizza, but delivering good pizza and well. Doing those things, something you can feel like I'm doing something positive, where the people are good to work with, where the standards, your standards and their standards mesh together well. These are all things, and of course the pay has to be adequate to your needs and respectful of your value, all those things. But having all those things, then you have this wonderful cooperation that develops, where you're valued for who you are, and you bring all of yourself to the job. You bring all your talents. You bring the best you. So that's a big implication for objectivism. And it means when one thinks about the job market, one thinks about, where can I find those kind of values of cooperation with other people?
Yeah, and one of the things that Objectivism and Ayn Rand did for me is that, again, I had a slightly more hostile relationship to capitalism than perhaps you when I came into it, which included work, right? You build a distinction between, okay, so there's work and you do that for money, and you do that in order to actually live your life the other time, because leisure is where the true value is.
Right, exactly.
Right? Yes. And Objectivism says, really? Really? It's the process of work through which you actually create things. And just as you create yourself, and then you can own yourself. Right? You determine who you want to be, and the more you do that, the more you're like, yes, I am that. And you get a profound sense of self from what you create. In the same way, the work that you do is the expression of yourself. And if you take work seriously, if you say, okay, I'm actually going to bring all of my values to the work that I do. And again, financial, certainly one of the dimensions of value that you get from your work. But who you work with, the quality of work that you do, all the things that you were just saying, that insight, that it is by bringing your best self to your work and doing things that you care about, bringing your values to your work, that's the essence of an Ayn Rand hero, right? All of Ayn Rand's heroes are productive, creative individuals. And it's not ironic, tragic, that Ayn Rand is portrayed in exactly the opposite, as if money's the only thing that matters.
Right.
When if you're familiar with any of her work, that's not the case. It's bringing the totality of yourself to your work, but taking your work seriously. Not dividing this thing that you're going to spend actually the bulk of your life doing, which is work. Right? Most people spend the bulk of their time at work, but they don't treat it seriously. They don't treat it as a true expression of themselves. And that is tragic. That is actually reversed for what you need for happiness.
Yeah, because if what you do is you hate your job and you hate it, but you spend all your time there, you're cultivating the worst of yourself all the time, and you're alienated from one of the main aspects of your activities. And in a way, you're dishonest to yourself about your values, because you shouldn't do anything and embrace anything that you really hate. I mean, that's not to say there are some jobs that are disagreeable and tough, but people have reasons for doing them. You know, they may value the pay they get, and that makes sense in their lives. It may be that they realize that the job is dirty. Let's say you work in a garbage collection job. It's dirty, and it's smelly, and it's hard work on a hot day, something like that. But you know you're doing a valuable service. You're creating a value there in society, and it's something important without which, civilization itself would fall apart.
Yes.
It's actually true. And, so you can appreciate work in a variety of different ways, but the point is you have to own it. You have to own it. And otherwise, if you hate it, but you do it, well, then when do you ever work for your values? When you're off in your leisure, aren't you likely to end up doing leisure stuff that you don't really care about either, and you don't give your full self to? Instead, cultivate the habit, I would say to people, cultivate the habit of owning everything. Own your leisure. Own your work time. In fact, blur the two. Think productive. Think values. It's what you're spending your time on is all about the values you're getting, the things that are making your life better. And leisure, work, it's a continuum of value seeking.
Yes. And the great thing is that the more that you do that, certainly my experience, the more I get clear about what it is that I value and then bring that to my work, the more I customize my work becomes increasingly an expression of my values, and therefore it becomes more valuable. And if knowledge is contextual, right? In a sense, I'll say yourself is contextual. In this sense, when you bring yourself to your work and you bring your values to it and you insist on treating it as if it's an expression of yourself and your values, then your work becomes a context in which your self, the productive self, the self that you're proud to be part of, your integrity, is reflected back to you through the relationships that you're in, through the projects that you take on. And then the more you do the work, the more you build yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the more, because you're acting with integrity, and it's all about value seeking. So the more as you succeed in getting values from your work, the more you'll be developing habits that help you succeed in getting values in the rest of your life, too.
Yeah.
So that's very important.
Yeah. Okay, and with that, there's this brings up, you could say, the context of aesthetics, the context of beauty, or what I call realization. Right, and the first book you edited was on aesthetics and art. Literary.
Yes, it's a book that's available even now. You can find it on Amazon. It's called The Literary Art of Ayn Rand, and it's a collection of essays about Ayn Rand as a writer of fiction. Not Ayn Rand as the philosopher, not so much the ideas in Ayn Rand's fiction, but her technique, her style, her influences, was in the Fountainhead, was Ayn Rand, how much did Ayn Rand base Howard Roark on Frank Lloyd Wright? We've got an essay about that in there. How did Rand's screenwriting training end up showing up in her style of writing? She has a style of writing which the literature scholar Kirsty Minshus discusses in this book, a style of slanted realism where she's visualizing scenes all the time. And if you go back and look at her work, you can just see how she's got these elaborately painted scenes that she sets up. And the point of what she's doing is really storyboarding in a way. She's someone who was trained as a screenwriter, and she's just, in going to the novel, she's thinking that way. She's thinking, well, here's the new scene, and here's the storyboard. Here's the backdrop that we would film if we were doing it in film. And that's all part of the way her literary imagination works. Those are the kind of things that are in there. But that, yes, so literary art of Ayn Rand.
Yeah. And I summarize her aesthetics in terms of romantic realism, where I borrow her phrase. Romantic realism, which is the concretization of an ideal, right? Something romantic, something towards which we can and ought to strive, something that inspires us, that concretizes what we believe to be beautiful, so that we can hold it in mind and guide ourselves towards it, to use it as a guiding light towards which you move. What do you think of that?
Well, I have a slightly different, in general, I agree with everything you're saying, but I have some nitpicks, I suppose, or I view it a little bit differently. Rand's idea of romanticism, for Rand, romanticism is a approach to art that appreciates the fact that human beings are volitional. So it's about choices that people make. And you think, she admired Victor Hugo a lot. You think of a great, but for that matter, Jane Austen's another example. The great 19th century novels tended to be all about the moral choices people made, the choices that they, did they take one path or another path, and what were the consequences of those choices? Well, that's what Rand is thinking about as romanticism, because it's about how people choose, or that the paintings are about scenes where people are facing important choices or making decisions that matter. So in that sense, you could do romanticism that was cautionary or not really. I think there's room for a romanticism that reflects a variety of values and is still romanticism. But Rand thought that we should have a kind of art, and her fiction was like this, where it's certainly based on reality and based in the facts, and recognizably factual, but very much about the values people seek, the choices they make, those kind of issues.
Okay. Well, so again, agreed. The part that matters for me is the idea of beauty. The idea that there is something that we ought to choose to move towards. And that the aesthetic realm is fundamentally that realm. It is that which we choose to move towards. And the particular, if we're creating a work of art, whether it's painting or it's a symphony or it's a literary work, there are certain techniques that you can use in terms of creating a dramatic plot that concretizes the fact of a choice and the results of the choice, right? But the example she uses, that if you create a painting of a woman and you include a pimple in the painting, that is an aesthetic choice, right? The parts that you choose to include in your art are a function of what you believe to be valuable, what you believe to be beauty, such that when you bring the choice to light, when you make clear, this is the choice someone is making, and here are the results that it gets, right? The rules by which that choice is portrayed and the results that come from it are an example of your metaphysics, your belief of what is beautiful, what is possible in life. In terms of beauty, in terms of what you're inspired towards, Ayn Rand offers John Galt, Francisco d'Anconia, Howard Rourke, right, as ideal characters towards which you can strive, right? As concretizations of something that you can look at as a guide and an inspiration. If we accept some version of that, how has Ayn Rand inspired you in terms of what you understand to be beautiful, possible for human being, what it is that you want from your life, from yourself, from your relationships, from your work? How has the aspirational quality of Ayn Rand impacted you? What do you find to be important about that?
Well, it impacted me, but in a way that, the way it impacts people it varies in the case. Mm-hmm. Let me see, how can I put this? For one thing, before I read Ayn Rand, I was the kind of person who read a lot of like fantasy and science fiction kind of things, and therefore spending a lot of time imagining some reality that was different than our reality. And one of the things that's really challenging about Ayn Rand's fiction is she brings the sensibility of the exciting science fiction adventure, or the sensibility of the Lord of the Rings. I think this is interesting, actually. She brings the sensibility of the Lord of the Rings in some of its fundamental aspects, not Tolkien's ideology, but some of its fundamental aspects, to railroading in Atlas Shrugged. Mm-hmm. She turns Dagny Taggart's struggle to create a new railroad line into the highest of romantic quests. And by doing that, she suggests, she pounds the table, but she makes it clear that what she wants us to understand is that there is beauty and truth in the world, in the life we live, in this reality. And so for me, this has meant everything from accepting the dictum that engineering is magic. That is, we have magic, it's engineering, where we create marvelous things that no one ever knew. In fact, I could go on about this idea at length, but in any case, I'll just cap it by saying that if we actually thought about a fantasy world where magic worked, people would think about it the way we think about engineering, because it would work and people would use it, right? And then it would be just that damn thing people use, right? Instead of the wonderful magic. But we have the wonderful magic, we just need to appreciate that that's what it is. My oldest son is off at engineering school, and I'm very proud of him, as I think he's becoming a magician. So he's a wizard going to create wonderful things.
Yes.
And it suggests to us that there's truth and beauty in the world around us. And so the choices we make in our lives matter immensely, and that those values that the fantasy and science fiction imply cannot be found in our dull, mundane world are very much to be found there. You just have to commit to finding them and to living by them. And that's a big challenge. And of course, it implies in objectivism there's a doctrine of the moral being the practical, and one of the implications of this is also of the valuable being the beautiful. That is, that you bring it together, your theory, your practice, your morality, and your idea of what's beautiful. And you bring it all together, and then you live a life that works, that is good, that is beautiful, and all those things. And it's just premised on this idea that the healthy is the beautiful, the well-made structure is the beautiful structure. I could go on, but it's just religious people talk about the sense of God being present in all things. And I think when one takes the objectivism seriously, one finds value present in all things and beauty, because you can't value something without seeing its beauty. And to be valuable is to be beautiful. In a sense, these can be complicated issues, but in the core sense, this is true. And then the world is just pregnant with beauty and meaning and value.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fond of saying that beauty is only as deep as you are. Right, and that when you seek yourself, the self value, as you said, when you bring your full self to what you're doing, right, including perhaps even especially your work, right, when you bring your full self, which some people call that self-ish, I like to call it self-full, right, to actually bring your full self to it, right, then your self is deeper, and so you can see more of the value in what you're doing. You don't. I think your allusion to Lord of the Rings or fantasy fiction, science fiction, me too, right? But it's the idea that instead of going to another world, a transcendent world, instead of getting beyond work to leisure. Right? Instead of getting beyond the cash nexus to real relationship, right? You recognize, no, it's all of the value comes in this world. From an artistic standpoint, you might imagine an allegory, right?
Sure.
But it's your ability to apply that principle to this world, to find the value in it, to find the beauty in normal experience. And to recognize that you bring that beauty through how you perceive it, how much self you bring to it, right? I was weeding in my garden, right? And weeding isn't necessarily my favorite activity in the world, right? Right. When I think of how am I going to spend my time? It's not top of my list, right? But having a healthy garden is one of the values I've chosen to pursue. And weeding is part of that. And so when I weed, it's like, okay, I am going to bring my full self to that weeding. I'm going to do it efficiently, effectively. I'm going to weed in the context of my values. I want a thriving garden. And therefore, every single thing that I do in terms of weeding becomes part of that romantic story of creating the thriving garden.
Right. And your weeding is making the beautiful flowers bloom.
Yes. And just like in any story, there's the plot movement. And weeding is part of the plot. Therefore, it is part of the climax. It is part of that story. It is beautiful to weed. And when I bring that self to it, it becomes this romantic experience. It's me and the weeds, and I'm in it. Right? I like to call the embodied expression of values, the embodied expression of beauty, I call it thriving. Right? It's not I want to transcend the world to find beauty. It's like, there's the mundane, right? The secular, and then the sacred. No, work is sacred. Right? Thinking, reason is sacred. Reason is beautiful. When you put your full attention on understanding, that process is beautiful. The knowledge you create is beautiful. When you share it with others, it's beautiful. When you create projects together and those projects get realized because they're actually consistent with reality, That is what it means to be a hero. That is an Ayn Rand hero. That is beauty.
Yes. Sounds good. You know, I was very glad to have you at our Atlas Summit this past July for the reason of hearing statements like that.
Excellent. Thank you. So in terms of heroism, right? You've devoted a not insubstantial part of your life to the promotion of Ayn Rand's work, to your work with the Atlas Society. I'm curious for you, what is the vision that represents? What is the goal, the vision, the beauty that inspires you, that guides you, that has you choose that as this is a meaningful project in which to engage my full self? If you have anything to say about that.
Well, I had a friend who called me a cardinal of objectivist religion, so in that sense, just as anyone who advances a certain ideological view to then work on advancing, someone who prizes a certain ideological view to work on advancing that view, you get sort of to be on the inside of the promotion of the view itself, which everyone who values it thinks is good. So in that sense, and you, of course, because you value it, you think that's good too. So I'm being a little intellectual about this, but there's that. I mean, at the Atlas Society, we've got a vision of a benevolent, thriving society that's based in a recognition of reason and an ethical approach to self-interest and an appreciation for human freedom and for achievement. I mean, that's the vision that we have, and everything we do is to try and promote that, to help make that situation happen. So in that sense, I think in working at the Atlas Society, I'm helping to build the kind of society and thus world that I think would be just awesome. And I'm standing up for values that I think are good and true. And I'm interacting with other people on a basis of offering them something that I think will improve their lives. So in that sense, I'm able to feel very strongly the win-win sense of what I'm offering other people. So those are all reasons why to get involved in it. I should also say, in all honesty, for me, working at the Atlas Society, I'm something of an academic, something of an intellectual. I sometimes teach philosophy and objectivism at the graduate level. One of the things I really like about objectivism is just its intellectual power. It's crucial and insightful answers to key philosophical problems. It's beautifully consistent system. The way you can draw a big diagram of the whole system, and I should caution, anyone's welcome, if they look up the logical structure of objectivism on our website, the Atlas Society, they can find that big diagram. I should caution that I don't think that's the only diagram you could draw of objectivism. There's limits to how you could change the structure, but there's some optionality in how you might tour through the structure. But that said, it has that structure. I just find all those things really beautiful, and I think they're really neat, personally. So it's just it's fun in that sense to be able to work in a job that lets me work with those ideas and lets me spend time enjoying the beauty of that system. So that's also one of the things that I really enjoy about my job.
Yeah. So.
And I guess there's a very practical level at which I like my job. I like my job because it lets me teach some classes and work on some intellectual books. And it lets me do business management and conference management and explore other aspects of my competencies and skills. And I like using those various aspects of myself. I find working in one area helps me recharge to work in the other area. Whereas if I just worked in one thing all the time, I get a little bit bored with it. There's a sameness to it. So I like the variety in my work too, and these are just all aspects of it. But it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing. I think everyone in their work, if they can feel like they're part of a crusade to make life better, that's the bomb. So it's great in that sense to work and do this work that I'm doing, because that's what it's about, day in and day out. And when I think about other jobs I might do, a lot of other jobs, but very few are going to have that kind of cachet to them, that kind of sense of, wow, I'm just working on this earth-shattering kind of project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Great. Well, thanks for the conversation, Will.
Thanks, Mark. It's been really nice being on this call and talking with you.
And is there anything that you'd like to leave people with, or you've talked about the Atlas Society website and your various books. Is there any other way that you participate out in the world that it'd be fun to let people know about, or is that probably the best way to learn more about you?
We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, so you can find us there, the Atlas Society. And otherwise, as far as our work goes, atlassociety.org. Check us out, and I'm very happy. If you have questions about objectivism, I'm very happy to hear about them. My email is wthomas@atlassociety.org.
Fantastic. Well, again, pleasure getting to know you. Great having this conversation. Looking forward to what we create in the future.
Me too. It's been a real pleasure, Mark. Thanks.
The Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero podcast is sponsored by the composer Darren John Lewis, whose music I use for this podcast. If you'd like a custom choral or symphonic piece for your special event or celebration, or if you'd just like to hear more of his music, go to darrenjohnlewis.com. That's DARINJOHNLEWIS.com. Thank you, and see you in the next episode of Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero.